That's a lot of work for all the other frames just to say that frame 232 is a genuine frame from some original film. Right? Some original film taken with a really fast shutter speed or things were going slower. So, but regardless, even if you did believe that, you've just proved to yourself the film was a fabrication. The film was a creation according to the techniques that David Healy was talking about. Okay? All of the frames, or most of the frames, nearly all of the frames, were created. Not just Stemmenstein pasted over the top with sticky tape and it was in the wrong place. You've got to create all of these. You've got to cut out the moving bits and blur them differently. And that assumes you're starting with objects which aren't blurred to start with. So you need really high shutter speed, which starts to make you question whether you've got the Zapruder camera. So almost all, if not all, the frames are created from some raw material. And again, I wrote this before I knew you were coming. This, what I've shown you already establishes this fact that you have to fabricate the whole film, one way or the other. You can't make that image real without fabricating the rest, cutting them out at least and blurring them, putting them back together with David's equipment. What I'm going to talk about now, I'm going to run through it pretty quickly, is just additional support once you start believing this. Right? Some of the start fleshing out the details of other things that are wrong and what you can learn from it.
You're saying that the car did not stop at 2:30.
Oh no.
You're saying it did not stop. But the fact that it's so crisp and clear on the rest of it means what?
It could not have come from Zapruder's camera. Well, frames 231, 232, 233, as we have them now, did not come through Zapruder's camera. Because it violates the laws of physics.
You have to have blurring in the background or blurring in the foreground.
And since the car's not stopped, you're saying, and then since the alternative would be to do water all over the place to rescue that.
Well, 231, 232, 233, with that image, is impossible, whatever scenario you look at, because 231, 232, 233 establishes the speed of the limousine, and Zapruder's camera is open for 45% of the time. It's not shown, so those frames did not come in that order from Zapruder's camera. I mean, that's established, that's proved. All right, I'll swear to that on a witness stand, that those three frames did not come through the Zapruder camera in that order, one after the other. It's impossible.
Yeah. If the shutter opening on the Zapruder camera is a little more than 50%, say, would that have any effect on your...
If it was more than 50, if it was open for more than 50% of the time, it should be blurred even more.
Okay, but I believe it is.
Open for more than 50% of the time.
Yeah, it's a larger opening than just 45%.
Right. Where did you get the 45%?
It works out a bit. There's an angle of the opening in the rotating... that's from the Zapruder report.
No, actually, in the Zapruder report, I believe it is, he states that it's, in fact, he even has a picture of it in there, where it's just a bit more than half the time.
Open more than half the time? Well,
that just makes your argument
stronger.
You say,
oh yeah, this makes this argument stronger. Makes this argument stronger and makes all the rest of the blurring in the film even that. In fact, it would make 302 and 303 probably off the edge of... I have to have a look at that. Well, I'm going to pull the thing apart as soon as you're not watching. But 45, 55% to this level of accuracy doesn't really matter. But it makes this one stronger. Oh, so I've stuffed it up for the last couple of years. But it's about half.
Yeah, rough.
All right. Save myself on that. Okay, some things which are not... Okay, well, that's it. The film is a fabrication. I could stop there and say thank you and go home and that's it. But there's other things that you notice along the way. In these Life magazine issues, only 2 sprocket hole edges were actually ever published. One is on the frame just in between those 2 really clear ones. One on the front of the MPI and the one that's I've just shown. Tiny little sprocket edge here, which actually has a black edge to it, which is what you do get on a real piece of celluloid. Sorry, you can look at it later, but you can't even see it, and I didn't scan it. I didn't think it was going to be here. It's not that important. But the edge of that sprocket hole is almost looks like a real sprocket hole would look like, because when you get to the edge of something, you get the changing of the transparency of the celluloid. That one doesn't tell us anything. the only other sprocket hole that you see, the only other sprocket hole edge, was in the Warren report issue. Okay, by accident. In fact, it was interesting to hear someone mention C.D. Jackson before as having some sort of connections, because of course you open the Warren report issue and you don't see anything about the Warren report. You find the fact that C.D. Jackson died just before the Warren report was issued. There's the obituary on the front page. But that's not what I was mentioning it for. The other sprocket hole you see is right here. The corner of this one. And I'll show it up on the screen in a moment, so don't worry if you can't see it there. But that's the full image where you see the edge of a sprocket hole. And which version have we got here? Oh, the 313 version. I haven't got that. I'm gonna have to get that. You have to scan that for me, David, because I have the 323 version. They kept changing one of the plates in that one because 323 was a problem as well. Here it is, a scan of just the corner of that image that I just showed you out of the Life magazine, and that's a sprocket hole. I'll establish that for you in a moment. Let's assume that this is the edge of a sprocket hole, and this here is a ghost image. Remember that we've got the ghost panel sorted down. There's no problem with the ghost panels. They're supposed to be there. They are there. The ghost image is coming through from the frame afterwards. There's something bright up here, probably Main Street, in fact, shining through. There's a ghost image. And that's a highlight on a limousine, something bright. And here's the sprocket hole. And where the sprocket hole crosses the ghost image, it's not white anymore. It turns this bluey colour. So I first better establish from the MPI that it is the sprocket hole. Okay, there's the sprocket hole. There's no doubt about it. That's the sprocket hole we're talking about. That's the whole thing according to MPI. Of course, I haven't mentioned this huge forearm of Clint Hill. That's a whole separate issue. I mean, that's one forearm there. I don't know. I don't know. But that, you can worry about that one at home. This corner changes. In Life magazine, that crosses over. In the MPI one, it comes down here. But you're still left with a bit of a halo. But of course on the DVD, let's make it really dark and let's wash out the colour so you can't see it. I've actually enhanced it. I've brought the brightness back up. That's why it's a little bit grainy over here. See the lousy colour? I've brought the brightness back up, brought the colour back up, and picked up some noise. And you can just barely see this halo. Okay? This halo of the hole. Let's go back to what's going on here. A hole is supposed to be a hole. Right? You can't have a blue hole. Sprocket hole, there's a blue limo, and when you get the highlights of the limo, it turns light blue, so that's the colour balance of this particular frame as has been published. What have you got here? You've got a white image of a sprocket hole exposed over the top, so no complementary mask, just a straight out sprocket hole image exposed over the top to make a sprocket hole shape. And then you have the ghost panel there as well. Now where you got the ghost panel with the sprocket hole, white plus white was enough white to make it white. Unfortunately, where the ghost, the little strip where the ghost image did not overlap with the sprocket hole image, you've got a single double, this is a triple exposure. It's blue plus white plus white. It's white enough to be white because you're adding more and more light. Here you've got just the sprocket hole image exposed plus the blue limo and you get light blue. Which is why I went to David Healy's version of the fabrication of the film. I thought you could have done it just by rephotographing through the Zapruder camera, frame by frame. Create each frame, put it up on a screen, rephotograph it, or some other mechanism to rephotograph it, and that will give you the pincushion distortion. That'll give you the ghost frames automatically. But this tells me it's not. This tells me that what David was telling me is correct. You can induce the pincushion distortion just with a couple of lenses. You can put the sprocket holes on, just expose the sprocket hole shape. And then the ghost images, well, you need the mask, which is the circular mask with the gate mask, and you put them together, you get the ghost images. So this tells me that David's version of the fabrication is correct. It probably was never photographed through the Zapruder camera, because it's actually difficult to get it. To do the blurring in the sprocket hole area, you've got to worry about the claw coming over the top. It puts a gap in the blur, and that's very hard to do with the Zapruder camera. You'd have to create that beforehand. And so that's what this thing tells you. And of course MPI tried to, I mean, Gary Mack even admits that MPI edited the edges of the sprocket holes. He admits they edited the edges of the sprocket holes, I believe. That's what I think he said. Or they may have. He says, yeah, well maybe they did. Don't trust the sprocket. And that's why this is such a clean digital vertical line, I think. And they've altered this corner. See that cuts across? That's rounded.
If you look at the top, it's blurred, basically, but that is such a clean line going down.
Yeah.
Just a minor one. When you say it's not Zapruder's camera, you mean there's some, but you've already said it's seamless and all the rest. So what are you saying? There's another person filming from Zapruder's position?
I'll get to that. I'm probably running out of time. So sprocket hole is really double exposure. This white thing originally was put over the top. Oh, I've got to go back a step actually. Talk about that in a second. The sprocket hole idea matches in with something David Mantic published, an observation in Assassination Science. And this is one example where it all pulls together. You've got to rely on everything that's come before. You noticed all the, David, you noticed all the halos on the sprocket holes in the Zapruder film? It's probably because they had, they'd already put, they thought they never had a need for a real piece of film. All they needed was things that looked like it was a real piece of film. They had all these images, frame by frame, prepared for the Warren Commission to publish in their report. You know, they built transparencies, slides. And then eventually someone says, hey, we're going to need a piece of film. We're going to have to shrink this down into a film because bloody Garrison wants to subpoena it or some other reason. We need a piece of film. So then they had to shrink it down, and they didn't exactly register the holes properly, just a little bit out, and so you get these halos. Bogus, I'm going to try and run through this really quick. The bogus wound to the head, here's a number of frames. They just happen to have nothing in the background, which is why I chose them. And you see the spray, and then this big crater. These are all aligned, so that little handle thing is in the same spot, and the rotation's fixed. And it's not de-blurred, but it's sort of Grodin-scoped, if you want to listen to Grodin. And there's a thing, and the thing slurps up his head. And just so you can see what it actually looks like, the blob slurping up his head as you go through the film, you know, it changes. That's the changing here. You can see it actually sliding up his head. If you look at it live, where's the red spray? The red spray that was introduced in one version of this version, David Mantic's version of the Warren report thing, the one that had 313, introduced the red spray, and maybe they thought that's the mistake. We don't really want that red one in there. Get rid of it, but it was too late. You don't see any red spray. And why? Because only in one frame. You get a bit of grey, which disappears very quickly. It's almost like a special effect. You can measure the amount of red, green and blue in each of those frames according to frame number. 313, it shoots up. Red plus green plus blue gives you white or grey. Red plus green plus blue lasts for about 4 or 5 frames. Where does it go? Maybe it blows away, I'm not sure. It can't fall out, even if you dropped a lead ball from his head. In fact, particularly the red. The red disappears straight away, and this just leaves you with grey. This is supposed to be blood. It's not supposed to be special effects. They do special effects for a movie. It's an explosion. It's an ignition. Once the ignition's gone, the explosion goes away. This is blood. It doesn't go away. It stays red. Blood stays red until it disappears. If you dropped a lead ball from his head, it'll take about 6 frames to even fall into the limousine. So it doesn't just fall away. That's glass painting or whatever. This is purely painted in, and this is all bogus. This has just been painted in. Someone's done an animation job which is really, I mean, that's pretty pathetic animation. Then you jiggle all the frames so that's not so obvious, and you throw in a back and to the left so it's even less obvious. That footnote to that book where he refers to the wrong issue, I couldn't believe it when I read it. 1980 he publishes it. In the 70s he recognised that this head wound is completely bogus and the Zapruder film is probably a fake. And again, I wrote this before I knew you were coming. And I thought, so 23 years later, we're 25 years behind him, except some of us maybe. Just from the fact that the head wound does not match anything else. The blob in the grass, again, I'll quickly run through this, and the very first, within the weekend of the assassination, there's a few frames that they're coming up on the screen, but also here. Tear it anymore, that's already torn. This big one is the big one over there. Here's the big one up on there. And there's a couple of little ones over here, which are the little ones over there. One thing to note, look at the quality of the image in the Life magazine, which you can examine firsthand here. All the details of people's faces. Jackie's face is just a shadow. You know, Life had the original film. What generation number is this? 6th generation or 10th generation? The quality was poor on purpose, I think. But this blob in the grass, which is sort of a marker that shows you what's going past. David Mantic published this in, I think, in Assassination Science. It's missing from all 3 frames on the first weekend. Some people have said, oh, but look, there's a puddle. They've painted over it because they didn't want trash in the grass, as the guy from the Conspiracy Museum told me. They painted over it. Strangely enough, if you look on the MPI version, this other one's MPI, but I made it black and white to make it fair. That same puddle is apparently on the original film. Right, so they painted over it for Life magazine, but they didn't paint the copy they had. They painted on the original film because, look, there's the same outline. Very hard to see, but if you look carefully enough on MPI version, maybe do a contrast enhancement, we're led to believe they painted it out and then they reintroduced a blob over the top. Well, that's pretty bizarre. The timing wasn't finished. The motion of this blob gives you an idea of the... Now you can see, if you look in that issue, you can see that you don't have many reference objects. And that's why they framed the thing so high. There was nobody on this side no bystanders on this side to make life difficult, the Newmans and the women. There's no reference objects because they crop it all out. They didn't have the timing finished. So you get this... The speed could be anything. Okay? The speed of the limo could be anything for these 3 frames.
They reframed it, right? There's already a full zoom, so why doesn't it show up on your... I'm a little bit surprised here. And if they reframed it, and you just said they reframed it, then they have to go above full zoom.
Well, I'll talk about that in a moment. I'll try and be quick, Jim. I might go a few minutes over. Is that all right? Greers and possible head turns, we've seen those. Jack showed them. I tried it myself. You can try it yourself. In fact, if you... I think the one on the fixed seat is more closely represents the limo. And if you spin 3 times faster, the centripetal acceleration on the front of your brain and your eyes is 9 times larger, about 11 G-forces. I'm surprised you could still drive.